we go. Hi, I'm Dawn Westmoreland, hailing from Asheville, North Carolina, the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains, hailing from WPVM LP FM 103.7, the Voices of Asheville. Every week, every Thursday, 4:30 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I have a show called The Empowered Whistleblower, and we talk about workplace issues, we talk about safety, we talk about psychological safety, how to improve the workplace issues. One of the places that we're going to talk about is the school system, because we just had an article come out only 30 minutes from here. We have AR-15s now being, secured in the schools for mass shootings, school shootings as such. And my guest today is Stacey Porter. Stacey, hi, how are you?
Hey, Don, how are you, Don? Thanks for having me.
So I know our listeners are going to say, "Who's Stacey Porter?" Let's learn about Stacey Porter. You have an impressive background, and just the fact that you told me you're 6'6". I'm like, wow, my brother's 6'5". That's tall.
Yeah.
Tell our listeners who you are, what you're about, and your background.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me again. My name is Stacey Porter, originally from Washington, D.C. Now I reside in Atlanta, Georgia. Just to give you a little bit of information about my background, I started my career with the federal government. I spent 23 years in doing that. Started with the Secret Service, worked for two former presidents, former President Clinton and former President Bush. During that time, Bush administration, 9/11, we were prepping for a congressional picnic that day. And we all know what happened during 9/11 in New York and the Pentagon, as well as Pennsylvania. So fast forward, myself, along with many other law enforcement officials throughout the country, decided, what can we do to ensure we never have another homeland or have another attack on our homeland? So I decided to join the Federal Air Marshal Service. Once I joined the Federal Air Marshals, the main concern, of course, were our airports and our aircraft. So in joining them, I conducted risk assessments on our nation's airports. So most likely, if you travel or flown into an airport, I probably did the risk assessment on that airport. Now, before I started doing that, of course, I went through extensive training on how to conduct risk assessments. So I went to the training facility out in Oklahoma City, FLETC, Georgia, down in that training area as well. Did extensive training, physical security, you name it. So enjoyed that, did that for a while, and had a great deal, learned a great deal as well. And as I was doing that, I decided, it's time for me to, climb the ladder within the organization. So I got promoted to a supervisor, and that's how I ended up here in Atlanta, Georgia. This was the location where I was promoted. And did that for a while as well, where I was charged with supervising other federal air marshals, and learned a great deal about the policies and procedures, which helped me out a lot as a supervisor. And on December 31st, 2017, I decided to close that chapter in my life, working with the federal government after 23 years. And I retired from the feds. Lo and behold, my name was actually mentioned over at the Atlanta Hartsfield Jackson Airport, that I was retiring, and they had a security manager position available. So I interviewed for that and got that position. It was a great job. I learned a great deal about that airport, did so many things and wore so many hats and doing that. But it wasn't what I envisioned doing when I retired. So instead of me sitting in the supervisor's seat and not giving it 110%, I decided to step away from that position so I can allow someone else to sit in that seat, and decided to start my own business, which is Porter Global Security. And funny story how that came about. I sat down, went on the Georgia website on, company names, had a piece of paper beside me, and I wrote down 3 company names. And the first name that I typed into the system, Porter Global Security, it was available. So I locked that in before anyone else could take it. And then I reached out to some of my contacts. A good friend of mine up in Virginia who does graphic design. She designed my logo for me. And then got with a web designer, and we went back and forth on how I wanted my website laid out. And one of the things I just want to mention to you in doing that, I looked at other consultants' websites, security consultant websites, and had a great deal of information on there. I enjoyed reading it. But one of the things I noticed is that I didn't know what that individual looked like. So I wanted to do something. How do I separate myself from everyone else? So I called my good friend who's a professional photographer here in Atlanta, and I asked him if he could take a couple of headshots for me. And I wanted to put my information, I'll put my picture on my website. I didn't want it to, outshadow the information on the website. But one
Mhm.
of the things I wanted to do is when people go to my website, I want them to see not only my information, but who that individual that they would be working with. And hopefully, when they see the smile, they would say, you know what, I wouldn't mind working with that person.
I would work with you any day, Stacy.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yes, yeah. I like that touch you talk about, the personal touch of putting your picture, your personality so that people understand who you are and
Hmm.
such. You know, when we were kids, probably the worst thing that ever happened in our schools, I mean, I can think in high school, the biggest thing was to pull the fire alarm and then everybody went running and scrambling and it was so exciting. And, I mean, probably for the kids, certainly not for the principal and the staff and the
Hmm.
teachers. But today, now things have really changed. Security has changed. We have active shooters. We have small schools, big schools, everything in between, where people are coming in and shooting our children. So let's talk about, risk assessments, in the school system, because I know that's something that you do.
Okay. Well, yes. One of the things I like to point out and mention to everyone, when you talk about risk assessments, I think to me that's the baseline for everything, and that can tell you, okay, these are the things that we need to have in place, or these are the things that we need to mitigate. And doing that, again, you're not only educating your staff or the staff members at the school, but you're securing that school as well. So I think that's very important. As you mentioned earlier, the town and not too far from Asheville, they want to place AR-15s inside the schools. Now, again, if I come into that area and I do this risk assessment, now we can sit down and say, okay, these are the recommendations that I would recommend for you to do. Again, I'm not going to discredit the police agency for making that decision because they are law enforcement officials. They are qualified and trained on how to utilize or how to use an AR-15. Now, keep in mind, when you talk about your AR-15s inside the school, yes, they will be secured. They're not going to be wide open for anybody to gain access to it. But when you talk about law enforcement, we go through so much far as training on how to learn the laws, on how to do your job to the best of your ability.
Mhm.
And we're always, when you talk about shootings, it seems like law enforcement is always outnumbered. So an SRO inside of a school, if you're talking about one, maybe two inside of a school, most likely they only have a handgun. That's it. So again, giving them extra ammunition or extra power will allow them to do their job. To me, will allow them to do their job to the best of their ability. Again, if we can place AR-15s or long guns inside a police vehicle, we should be able to do in a secure way, placing AR-15s inside the schools to ensure, okay, when you have an incident occurring at the school. Now, one of the things I will point out, if an incident is occurring in the school, I don't believe that officer should leave that incident to go to wherever the location of that safe is to retrieve that long gun. If that incident is occurring, you need to take action right away because time,
Mhm.
we're always working against the time. So that's important right there. Now, again, if you have access to gain, or if you can gain access to that safe to get that long gun, okay, you can do that. But I don't think any officer should be required to leave an incident to retrieve a long gun. You handle that threat right then and there, and that if that requires the pistol, then you do what you need to do.
Stacy, you mentioned the acronym SRO. I know what it is, but our listeners, some of them may not. What is the SRO?
Yes, those are the school resource officers. Most counties or districts throughout the nation, they have the SROs in the schools, and I think personally they're a great asset for the schools. They can build wonderful relationship with the students. But one of the things we have to keep in mind, we can't use the school to prison, use the school as a school to prison pipeline. So those are the things that we have to keep in mind. You are the educator. You were trained and qualified on how to handle a student. Now, if that student goes hands-on on a teacher or principal, if you will, that's when you may need to get that SRO involved. But for the most part, I think an SRO needs to stay in their lane, understand that You're not out on the street, you're in a school, and that mindset has to change just a little bit. Still do your law enforcement duties, but I think you're there to build that relationship with not just the educators, but with the students. And you see that a lot. We don't hear enough about these feel good stories with a lot of these SROs inside the schools, because you can have a kid having a bad day and they would see that SRO and they would just, confide in that person and just open up. And, it could be maybe just sitting down playing a game of chess, or just, walking to class together, just laughing and talking. And all of a sudden you start building more and more of the relationship with the SRO. So I think it's very important that we have them in the schools.
Yeah, I know. I attended the Asheville Citizen Police Academy before COVID started, and
Mhm.
we met one of our SROs, and he was just a jolly fellow. You could tell he would be really awesome with children and such.
Okay.
I'm glad you brought that up. Now, you and I had an interesting talk earlier. We were talking about parents, and children. Should they be involved with the decision if AR-15s are put in schools, or any other kind of equipment?
Again, that's a great question. And again, you have to go back to the risk assessment piece. And once you have that professional, if it's the school security manager or the school security director, or if you bring in an outside entity to come in and do this risk assessment, once you have that risk assessment conducted and your recommendations are, finalized, and that report is handed over to the superintendent or to the school district, you have that on paper that you had an assessment done. And this is why we made the decision that we did. Now, I don't think parents or students should be involved in the decision making, personally, when you talk about security, because again, security, that's not may not be their background, but yet, we're just, talking about a knee-jerk reaction. And that's what we don't want. We want to make sure we're making sound decisions on what we're doing when it comes to our students and when it comes to our educators. So yes, hear them out, of course, hear what they have to say. But far as decision making on security, I don't think that should be involved any of the parents or the students.
Mhm. And we were talking earlier also about houses of worship, and you brought up a good point. I'll let you share that with our listeners.
Yeah, one of the things, again, when you talk about conducting the vulnerability assessment, that may not be the end all be all. Just because I did the vulnerability assessment for your facility, you still have your congregation. They need to know what to do when you talk about houses of worship. So again, training is very important. And when I talk about doing a vulnerability assessment, as long as my client, who happens to be the leader of that church or the staff members of that church, they know what's going on, the congregation, they don't need to be involved in the risk assessment piece of it. And that's the same thing you have to transfer over to the schools as well. Okay, if I've already built my relationship with the superintendent or with that principal, and that's my client, that's who I'm working for. I'm not working for the parents or for the students. My client is actually the superintendent of that school, and any and every little thing that I'm involved in, he or she will know exactly what's going on. And again, I'm not there to make anybody look bad. I'm there. What do you
Mhm.
want me to do? What keeps you up at night? Okay, these are the things that we can start looking at. Okay, you're concerned about, this door not being secured. Okay, let me take a look at it. Okay, this is an easy fix. Or I would recommend having a camera placed at this door. So those are the things that I would look at, and that doesn't have to involve parents or students at all.
Yeah, good point. So let's talk about, the AR-15 versus like a pistol. And,
Mhm.
you know, what should an SRO use, or anybody who's dealing with an active shooter in a
Yeah.
school or a house of worship or anywhere?
Okay, well, again, that comes down to your training. And again, when you're talking about law enforcement, and that's an SRO, they are law enforcement. They've gone through extensive training on that. If the threat is right there in front of you, you have to handle that threat right away. That doesn't mean you have to leave and say, okay, let me go to the safe and get the AR-15. Now you're talking about time, just like we saw in Uvalde. There was so much time that we saw, and I'm sure everybody's seen the video. So again, you want to handle that threat right away. Now, again, when you talk about, the pistol and the long gun, you have to factor in close quarters. Is it a close quarter? Will I be able to utilize the AR-15? Probably not if it's close quarters, because now that
Mhm.
individual could possibly grab it and you're in a tussle, and that's something that you don't want. So keep in mind, you have to factor in that, and it all depends on the scenario.
Mhm.
Okay, am I in the long hallway? Am I in a close quarter? So those are the things you have to keep in mind when you compare the two. But as I always like to say, if you're law enforcement, you've gone through the training, you've done everything you needed to do, and if they are qualified or certified to have long guns and police vehicles, then that's probably something that we can look at, which it may not sound right, but this is the world that we're living in today. As you mentioned, when we were going to school, the biggest thing was pulling of the fire alarms just to disrupt the class. But today, we're talking about AR-15s inside of a school, and I'm pretty sure they're not going to just be wide open as far as, okay, this kid know where the safe is. But you also have to keep in mind when you talk about AR-15s in schools and you have students around, because students can be mischievous and, hey, so and
Yeah.
so, did you know this is where they keep the information? So keep that in mind that again, as long as that weapon is secure, you know how to get to it, you know how to access it, and that's something you also want to keep in mind.
Mhm.
How often are you going around checking on that safe to make sure it hadn't been tampered with? Will it have some type of seal if someone were to tamper with that and you see, okay, the seal is out of place? You know what? Let me check and make sure nothing's going on. Will you have cameras in that area? So if someone were to tamper with the area or that safe, you have a camera right there where you can pull and go with that tape, if you will. So those are the things that all come into play when you talk about the risk assessment, and that's how you can mitigate some of these things, if you will.
So if one school has, they're already set up, they've had their risk management, and they've had a consultation, they have strategic plans, they have everything in place. Can they just share that with another company or another school?
One of the things I always like to say when I did my risk assessments on our nation's airport, if I looked at LaGuardia Airport and I look at Hartsfield Jackson, every airport is different. No matter, hey, they're about similar size. No matter the size, every airport is different. Now, it's good that, okay, if I'm doing this assessment on this school and then I go over to another school and say, you know what, this school is doing something similar to this. Maybe we can, kind of share that information, not so much utilize what they're doing, but just kind of share a little bit of information. It may work, it may not work. So again, communication is key, and
Mhm.
that's how we get to the end result, if you will. Just making sure communication is wide open, and will this work here as it did at this school system? So again, that's a great question, and that's something you can discuss. But again, every school is different. Every airport, every organization, no matter what risk assessment you're doing, you can't go in looking at everything the same way. Everything is different to me.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Yes. So this is something that comes up all the time. What if they don't have the money? What if they don't
Yeah,
have the money to have a full out security, plan, system, program, whatever
yeah.
you want to call it? Are there like minimum things that could be done?
And that's where the training comes into play. Again, it's important to have this assessment conducted, but you also have to factor in, I've had this happen to me before. Do you provide any type of training? You know what? That's a great question. I do provide training. So if we can change the mindset of individuals on how they think, I've seen it, pull up to the front of a school, there's the front entrance of the building, but
Mhm.
that teacher a few doors down, that's where he or she, that's where their class is. Instead of me going through the front entrance and walk all the way down the hallway, I'm just going to cut through this door right here that I know it's always open. And we see that a lot, in, with our schools, small towns. It doesn't matter if you're in a, large city area, but we just have to change the mindset of our educators and people utilizing this school. Just this is how we think, and this is how we're going to do business. I'm not trying to be mean or anything like that, but I can no longer hold the door open for dawn when I enter the school. I have to make sure
Yeah.
that door secures behind me, and the school will have to access allow dawn access into the school. So again, those are some of the things that we can look at as far as I always tell people when I come in and look at your organization, I want to come in and look at things in a cost effective way, because of course, it would be nice for me to say, hey, here's $1 million and this will fix everything that you have. But we know that's not the case. And especially when you're talking about schools, they're given a certain budget every year.
Mhm.
And I know our public schools are funded by the federal government. So we have to keep that in mind when you're going in doing the risk assessment. Not only that, you also have to catch the schools at the right time, because once they're given their monies, they already have things that they have to map out and
Yeah.
put into place. So now here comes a security consultant. Well, we've run out of money. There's nothing we can do about it right now. So just keep that in mind as one, hopefully building that relationship at the early onset of the school year where they do have the money, and then just going in and look at things in a cost effective way. Do I really need to spend a lot of money on this door when all we had to do is make sure the lock was secure? Not sure how much something like that will cost, but technology is great, but it still comes down to the human factor. And if you have the
Yes.
money, yeah, if you have the money to buy the technology, that's a good thing for you. But don't get so an uproar or knee jerk reaction that we have to have the latest and greatest technology for all schools.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point. We fall into the government with the public school system. And I know everybody has to have a budget,
Hmm.
and things come up. Things always come up, that you never thought would come up. But security right now, if we were to look at security, for the whole nations, for all the public schools, do you feel that the government needs to put more money towards security at this time?
I think they do. I get it. Their hands are tied, but we look at what occurred on January 6th at the Capitol building. I guarantee right after that incident, security was beefed up to a high.
Oh,
So my
yes.
point is, in saying that, is if we can, provide, the top security for our congressional members, then we should also be able to do the same thing for our students and our educators as well throughout this country. So that's just my take on it. And I know there's grant money out here. And I know each president that comes into office, they will look at, okay, we're going to give or, suggest this amount of grant money for our schools. Or, I know it's a process in place. It may not be the president having the final say, but there is money out there, and you can go in and request some of this grant money, and hopefully that be able to do everything that you're looking to do as far as your schools are concerned. And one of the things we have to keep in mind, I know here in Georgia, school started last week, so we're
Yeah.
right there now. School is starting up, and are they prepared? Some schools right now, and I'm pretty sure that's what Madison County decided. Listen, this is a decision that we're going to make as far as our AR-15s, and pretty sure there's going to be other decisions made as well. But this is the decision that we're going to make right now for our SRO officers, and then we'll move on from there. So that's one of the things we have to keep in mind throughout the country, that school is starting up in the next couple of weeks for everybody.
Yeah, good point. Do you think the teachers are more nervous and the principal and the staff, are they more nervous now with all the shootings? And, we don't know what's next?
Yeah. It's hard to really speak to that because, again, I'm not an educator. I'm not in the schools. I think we do still have a lot of passionate teachers that want to do what's right for the students and want to do what's right for the schools. But at the same time, a lot of these educators, you talk to them, they'll tell you, this is not what I signed up to do when I went to school. I didn't know I was going to be charged with, you know, becoming law enforcement, if you will. I know that's not the case, of course, but there may be some nervousness. I think drills, when you talk about training, drills are important. And I think you need to involve our educators when you talk about the drills, because then that way they can have a better understanding of what they need to do with their students. But one of the things you also have to keep in mind when you talk about doing these drills, you have to be mindful of what type of drills you do at these schools, because it can be traumatizing for our educators as well as our students. So be mindful of that when we're talking about training and doing drills and involving our educators. But a lot of them will tell you, this is not what I signed up to do when I went to school to be an educator. And
Mhm.
I agree with them. That's not something that they want to do, but at the same time, they have a passion for the field. They love the students, and they will tell you, I will do everything I need to do to make sure I protect these students.
Yeah, my mom was a teacher's assistant for the special
Mhm,
needs children. And, the questions come up often, what about, people with disabilities, children with disabilities? They could have autism, they could have,
mhm.
you know, it could really traumatize them,
Yeah.
these drills and stuff.
And you bring up a great point. So when you start talking about drills or when you start talking about protecting our students, that's something that we don't talk about a lot, our students with special needs. What do we do with them? Because again, when you talk about students with autism, are they on the high end, low end? How do I
Mm,
approach this person? But at the same time, I need to get this person to safety. So those are the things that also you also have to factor in when you start talking about schools is our special needs. You have students in wheelchairs. How do we secure that? So it's so much, like I said, a school, securing a school, there's so many pros and cons involved with that because it's a wide open campus and it's just, so much involved in it when you start talking about making decisions for various things within the schools. That's why I keep hammering over and over, and I'll keep saying it, but that risk assessment is so important when you start talking about our schools.
yes, absolutely. So let's talk about your services as we wrap up, and time
Okay.
goes so quick, Stacy. So what kind of services are you offering around security?
Okay. Yes. As we talked about our risk assessments, if you look at my website, I do go in and talk with houses of worship. The doors are open again, so you have to talk to that. Also with schools, as we mentioned, schools are opening back up for the fall semester. And then, you look at your organizations. I recently did a risk assessment on an organization out in New Jersey back in May. It was a CDC facility, and there were a lot of concerns that they had, and I was able to go up there and do the risk assessment for that facility. Still closing that out, if you will. And then, I also did the risk assessment of South Beach last year in Miami because there were some concerns with the city of Miami when it comes to South Beach.
Yeah.
So those are the things that I do. I always like to share with people, if you have four walls and you have employees inside those walls, when was the last time you had a risk assessment conducted? Because your employees are your assets, and liability is a big word that can be thrown around. And if you're not protecting your employees, then you can be liable for something happening.
I'm really glad you brought that up. I really am because, we're seeing all these litigations because a place wasn't, secured, or there wasn't security or somebody to protect them
Mhm.
and such. So really good point. So let's talk about your website again is what for the listeners?
Yes, my website, it's porterglobalsecurity.net. Again, if you want me to put that in the chat or however way you want to do it, but it's porterglobalsecurity.net. You go on there and it will give you everything that I offer, everything that I do. It'll give you, my background. So that's what I do a lot of times when people say, "Hey, what do you do?" And I know you have to have that elevator pitch, when you're doing some type of networking, but so I have that all together, but at the same time, I always tell people if you go to my website, that will give you a better understanding of everything that I do.
So do you have any articles you write, or do you do any blogging
Yes,
or
I do
videos
blog.
or training?
I've done a few videos. As far as blogs, I try to do monthly blogs. And since we are talking about, schools, I recently did a blog on that. That was my latest blog. But, again, I always tell people when you go into my website, just have at it, look at all the tabs. And if you don't want to look at all the tabs, go to the blogs, take a look at the blog, and that'll give you some ideas and understanding of what I do and, why I'm passionate about what I do.
Yeah. Stacy, thank you for your sacrifices you've made being, in all these security positions. And thank you for educating our listeners because, this is a time of great change. And fear is never our friend. I've always been told that fear is not our friend, but we have to be proactive. Thank you so much for being on my show.
You're welcome, and thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to coming back again if you ever need.
To our listeners, stay empowered. We'll see you next time. Take care.